Hello and welcome to Behind the Scenes, a podcast where we explore the intersection of art, culture, and big ideas. I'm your host, Sean Malone, the creative director for the Foundation for Economic Education, and of course, creator of Out of Frame, video essay series on YouTube. Here today, as usual, with Paul Nelson, our senior marketing manager and head of social media at FEE, and of course, Jen Mafasanti, who is the director of communications at the Libertas Institute in Utah. How are you guys doing today?
Doing well. I am completing my next step to becoming a full-fledged father.
Just a dad.
We bought a minivan. We bought a minivan. For those of you who don't know, we are expecting another child, our third, in about a month now. So, yeah, we made the plunge. I bit the bullet. I'll be rocking a minivan, but I've been trying to think of ways to make the minivan cooler for me, mainly. My wife doesn't care. So I've thought about rims, thought about lowering it. We'll see what happens.
Spinning rims? You could get spinning rims for a minivan. This would be interesting.
Yeah,
I need to do more research into the size of rim I could actually feasibly put on a van.
Could you enhance the wheel size and actually just go up a couple sizes, get bigger wheels?
Yes. But then you could be sacrificing some ride comfort.
That's true.
There is that, yeah.
So you got to be careful on there's trade-offs.
You probably can't jack it
up
real high off the ground either, because you probably ground clearance could be cool, but
a lifted minivan would fit in Georgia really well.
It would actually for a fact. Yeah. I think that we should go with the fantasy mural on the sliding doors.
I'm a big fan of the fantasy mural, but
my sons would too. Yeah, they would love that.
Would you be comfortable painting over a bunch of windows, I guess is the question. But,
I bet there's ways to do it. Again, you do these wraps all the time. You could do a wrap.
Yeah, you could do like a vinyl wrap. And they have the see-through window ones now.
Hear me out. What about Mr. T's van? What about going A-Team with it?
Well,
black with some like racing stripes, maybe?
I love it when a plan comes together.
Mm-hmm. That's an idea.
Is it coming together? I'm not sure. This might be a plan going off the rails at this point. I'm not quite sure.
Getting from point A to point B in style.
I think that should be the plan. Goal. That should definitely be the goal.
Can't argue with that.
Yeah. So that's how my life's going.
My life is taking an interesting turn as well, but not quite in the same direction. My wife and I just bought a new house, and I am converting a large garage, exterior garage, detached, I guess is the right.
There you go.
There we go. Detached garage. It's a 30-foot by 43-foot ish space that I'm converting into a production studio where I'm actually going to work every day. And we got all the framing done this weekend for it. Me and a couple of the other guys from our team actually were very generous enough to lend me their time over the weekend. And me and Pavel, who is our producer here, and Andrew and Tim, who are our designers at FEE, came out and we got all this framing done, and I couldn't be happier, man. It's super exciting, and I'm going to meet an electrician tomorrow out there, and we're going to start working on the electrical, and it's a huge project, but I'm actually like ahead of schedule currently. It's just a little bit of knock on wood aspect to this, especially in an environment where everybody's been like backed up with projects, especially construction projects. There's such a pain right now, but it seems to be going pretty well, and we don't have to move in until the 15th of April, actually. So I still got a good buffer of time to get everything done, and but it's going to be super cool. Like we're not really doing the maybe I'll do like a YouTube short or something. I don't know if people would care about that. I am speaking of YouTube shorts, by the way, they're crushing it right now, except for I just put out an episode that people are like really angry at me for. So I'm like sort of
We love your opinions until we don't.
That is I've gotten that a couple times. It's predictable too. I knew this one was going to make some people upset. It's very much like the episode we did on scalpers for PS5s.
Yeah, that one made people mad.
People got real mad at me on that one, and they're getting mad because I said in a 60-second short that I actually liked Arcane, but I didn't really like any of the main characters in Arcane, because they're bad people for the most part. They're not good. They're thieves and corrupt politicians and vandals and thugs, and like they're mostly not very good guys in the show. And I'm getting a set of reactions that are really fascinating to me. One is a version where people are not actually, they're like sort of bypassing what I'm actually saying, and they're just assuming that what I mean is that they're poorly written characters, which is not what I said. I said they're morally bad people, not the same thing. And then also the one that's been really interesting to me, in fact, I've seen a bunch of comments on YouTube for that, but I actually also just saw a comment on, I don't know if I can pull it back up, on Odyssey, which we don't talk about very often, but we do have all of our Out of Frame episodes on Odyssey. But a guy basically came in and was like, you're an idiot because the world is pain and everyone is evil in the world. And so the show is just reflecting reality. And I like that about the show, because the world is filled with terrible people. And I was like,
this person sounds fun.
That's not a fun way to live. I don't recommend that as your defining worldview.
At parties. I bet they get invited to a lot of parties.
I've seen a decent amount of this on YouTube as well so far today. Like we only put it out today, so I'm like sort of getting the immediate flood of comments and stuff like coming to my feed. And there are an awful lot of people on there who are just like, well, this is just reality because everybody's awful. And I'm like, look, there's like a lot of people who are like apathetic or mediocre. There's a small number of people who are actually awful. There's a very, very, very small number of people who are like evil and like really, really bad. The vast majority of people are on the like neutral to pretty good, like okay to pretty good territory. Like there's a bell curve. There's a bell curve here. Like most people are totally fine. Some people not great. A lot of people pretty good actually. And I always say too, like what's fascinating to me about that worldview is like the world would look very, very different than it actually does if most people were like bad, right? Like if most people were thieves and murderers and violent criminals and all of that kind of stuff, like we would live in a very, very different world. You could not live in a society at all. It would be like Mad Max nonstop all the time. You'd have to carry guns everywhere because somebody was going to rob you every second of your life. Like it's just nothing like that happens for real people. Like you pretty much go about your day having normal interactions with other human beings who don't generally wish you any harm. And yet, like, I meet people a lot who are like, oh no, the world is full of evil people. And I'm like, is it though? Is it really evil people? Yeah. Like it's sometimes full of people who don't care about you because they don't know you, but I've traveled all over the world, and I've found one thing very, very consistently is it's actually like been really, really reinforcing a general sense of optimism that I have about people. Like international travel is great because like everywhere you go, people are pretty nice. Like they want to show you cool stuff. They want to make sure that you have a good time. They want to make sure that their city that you're experiencing for the first time is like giving you a good experience so that you go away like feeling good about the city and good about the culture. They pretty typically like willing to share. I don't know. It's super weird. I'm reading all these comments now and everybody's like, the world is terrible. It's all pain everywhere. And I'm like, I don't know, man.
Yeah. It feels like it goes hand in hand with a lot of people's initial reaction of just saying that we live in a terrible time. We talked about this on the pod at length previously about this is weird need for people to just really hate everything.
Yeah.
About 2022. And like, for real, we've had some really bad stuff, especially from governments the last couple of years. But all in all,
it's still a pretty good time.
The time we live in, like, it's crazy. It really is hard for me to take people serious when they say we live in a dystopia, people are evil. It's just, what world are you living in? It just seems like it's like willful ignorance almost, because it's just not what I have ever experienced at all.
Yeah.
Even
now, like, you look at some of the things that people in power are doing. We talk about Trudeau in Canada and the stuff that's going on there, but like, the vast majority of people aren't doing that. And the vast majority of people you like actually meet on a day-to-day basis are like really not there. Now, I do worry that a lot of people just sort of reflexively support some of that kind of stuff, or they're just like inactive, like they don't care enough to pay attention to some of those things. But I mean, that's also very different from being like actively, a thief or a violent criminal or whatever. I don't know. It just seems it's very depressing worldview, let's say. But that is not what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about Reacher, which is a new series on Amazon Prime, which is based on a book series. I bet we have it in our notes, but I was not paying attention.
By Lee Childs.
Lee Childs, thank you. Oh, Lee Child.
Excuse me.
My mistake. The Killing Floor was the original novel. And now I've heard about this for a lot of years. And then of course, when the Tom Cruise movie came out, everybody was talking about how different the movie was from the book. I'm hearing now that this version of the show is much more faithful to the book, but I don't really know. And because I don't know, I'm going to go to resident bibliophile, Jen Mafasante, who of course...
That would be me.
Who of course watched the show and then immediately went to discover the book instead.
Yeah, I did. I watched the show and I felt like I was missing out on something because everybody was speaking so positively of this show. And I felt like I'd missed something in my original watching. So I went and I got the book and I read it. And it is an extremely faithful adaptation from book to screen. And I haven't seen the Tom Cruise versions, so I can't make any sort of comparison there. But I will say that the series on Amazon Prime was extremely faithful to the book. Probably too much so.
Yeah, so a lot of people seem to be very positive about the show. I'm one of them. I enjoyed the show in general. It's not my favorite show of all time. We'll get into that in a minute. But like, it seems to be doing well. It was one of the Amazon. It seems to be one of Amazon Prime's more popular shows, and they've already picked it up for season 2. So I think you're in the minority, at least, or somewhat possibly in the minority. Or this is another Wheel of Time situation where people complained about it. I don't think that many people complained about Reacher, at least not in my world. But let's say they did. Amazon seems to ignore complaints in any case. So who knows what their strategy is exactly. But I don't know, Paul, what were your sort of initial thoughts on the show?
Yeah, so I ended up enjoying this. The first few episodes, wasn't really into it, but then I realized...
Like, what didn't hook you about the first couple?
It was just pretty, boring, honestly. But I finally figured out what this is. And what this is just a CBS CSI for Amazon. And once I realized that this is not going to be anything better or more nuanced than NCIS, I started to enjoy it. I was like, okay, if this is what it is. It's CBS, but with the blood cranked up a little bit, like half a notch, not even to 11, and a little bit of nudity here, like.
Yeah,
it wouldn't even raise to like HBO levels of stuff. So like this was this was just catnip for boomers. It was CBS to the max. But that's not. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. And I want to make that clear because like I ended up enjoying it.
Yeah, like I hadn't really thought about it in those terms, but like when you put it that way, it definitely feels like something that Dick Wolf could have produced, right? Like it feels like
he should have done it.
I'm really surprised that he didn't. Yeah.
So, I mean, but it's true though, because like I think the one thing that really sets it apart from those kinds of shows is that it is not it's not episodic. Like it's a serial show where you've got one story for the whole season, but it doesn't. It's not a true detective. It's not a crime show or even an action show. Like it's not really, like you're right. I think it's a CBS cop drama to some extent, police procedural, except for it's not episodic, right? I don't know. That's an interesting way of putting it because I found myself sort of feeling the same way about the first couple episodes where I wasn't like super hooked. But I also wasn't like put off by it. Like it was just kind of in the middle for me. It was just like, I can watch this. Like this is a thing that I can have on and it's not offensive. I like Alan Ritchson just fine. Also, like I watched, it's funny. Like I think of Alan Ritchson originally from being in Smallville. He played Aquaman in Smallville like a million years. Well, what feels like a million years ago is probably only like 10 years ago. But and then he was in Titans, another DC superheroes series, and then he just I don't know if I feel bad about spoiling Titans, but he got killed off on Titans, and I assume so that he could come and do this. I think is probably probably what happened there. But in any case, I liked him fine as Reacher. People told me that he was. Much more faithful to the book version of Reacher. If you guys don't know, there were actually two of them. There was a Jack Reacher movie and a sequel starring Tom Cruise a few years ago. And one of the complaints that people had about that was that it, like Tom Cruise was just like nothing like the character that they imagined. And then actually what's funny to me is like this series seems to draw like explicit attention to that difference all the time. It's like, man, you're a giant. You're a huge human being. He's like 6'5" or whatever. And he's just a massive. And then everybody's like, Tom Cruise is not a giant, rather famously not a giant human being.
He's small.
He's a small fellow. But I don't know. I enjoyed the Jack Reacher movies just fine. They're not great. They're just, I mean, I don't know. I guess you could say like they're middling to like a lower tier movie in the history of like Tom Cruise's career, but that's still a relatively high bar for things, I don't know. It's interesting. The movie spent more time. So the character, as I understood him from the previous movies, was that he was a military police officer. And so Tom Cruise in those movies is still an MP at the beginning of those movies. Like he's still an active military officer, I believe. Anyway, if I recall correctly, I think he's still. And then he gets caught up in some horrible conspiracy. But that's all centered around army stuff. It's still centered around like military, like some kind of like corruption inside the military itself. In this case, Jack Reacher is retired from the military. He seems to be just ambling about the world, doing his thing. And he ends up on a bus. We meet him as he steps off a bus outside of a fictional town called Margrave, Georgia, which I want to talk about later because it feels like no town in Georgia that I've been. To me, it feels like a northern, it feels like the interpretation of the South from somebody who's never really been to the South to me, which is kind of an interesting thing. But anyway, steps off a bus, ostensibly to go search for the final resting place of a blues musician named Blind Blake, who is a real blues musician, by the way. And just kind of ambles around this town. And then suddenly suddenly gets caught up in a murder plot. Somebody gets murdered, and of course they blame the outsider. They go arrest him, and he meets some people, and things kick off from there. I don't know. I mean, it's a pretty pretty pulpy way to start. I feel like.
Yeah, like scene 1 is basically, well, there's the introductory scene where we see people actually getting killed.
The murder.
And then the murder. And then smash cut to Jack Reacher getting arrested in a diner. And
just trying to have some peach pie that he's been told.
Just trying
the greatest peach pie in the world.
In the state.
Okay, in the state. Fair enough.
Let's not overstate things here.
I think they were still overstating things. I think
100%.
They made that clear. But yeah, I mean, it's drifter wanders into town and then immediately gets arrested because a crime has been committed. I feel like it's sort of the vibe of the show. I don't know, Paul. Did that and that didn't hook you exactly?
No, because on the face of this, there's nothing interesting going on screen, and the story hadn't kicked off yet, and it doesn't kick off for about an episode or two.
A guy trying to eat some pie in a diner isn't exciting enough for you?
No, I mean, like, there's nothing interesting cinematically. Like, the videography is just it's like I compared it to NCIS.
Yeah.
I mean, if you told me this was on CBS, the only time I would say no, this wasn't on CBS is when there's some scenes where, like, okay, that's not that, this has to be somewhere else. But it just felt like it was going to be on the background in your grandparents' house, or it's like it's 9 o'clock, Reacher's on.
Yeah.
So it just didn't quite hook me in for the first few episodes until they really started getting into the plot, and then by that time you are introduced to most of the characters, and it's a relatively small cast, which I appreciated. But it was, I wouldn't say slow, because as we discussed, is pretty much, murder happens right at the beginning of the show, but it's slow in the sense of getting back to the actual, like, whodunit type of thing.
Yeah. I will say I liked a lot of the action in the show. I thought Richardson did a really, really good job as an action star, which, again, I mean, like the resume, if you look at him, I mean, he's done a lot of action shows and a lot of that kind of stuff in the past. But like, I thought that was pretty interesting to me because it was pretty, like, let's just take where he goes, he gets sent to county jail, or I think it's county jail, and immediately gets in a fight with a bunch of guys, whatever, prison gang, whatever it is. And, like that shower, like, fight scene, pretty good right off the bat. So I thought a lot of that kind of stuff actually ended up being, and also what was interesting to me maybe a little bit was that the show really did not have that many shootouts. It was a lot more like, the fights were a lot more like personal, like a lot more hand to hand, a lot of that kind of stuff. So a lot of the action was pretty raw in that sense. But again, I think you're right. Like, the lighting and everything else just really made it feel very CBS in general.
Yeah.
But go on.
Which, I feel like I'm being very, I'm poo-pooing the show a little bit, but I ended up really enjoying it. And I was wondering, as we've talked about, the culture wide has talked about the decline of broadcast television and the rise of the streaming platforms and all that stuff. But with the streamers, they never really, it's always very hard R, or taking a very different tact to storytelling that they did on broadcast television. But I always was thinking, well, broadcast television was big and watched by, not just because it's the only option, but just people enjoyed it. It was culturally relevant.
Right.
And where is that content going to live now? Because there's obviously millions and millions of people that want that. Mm-hmm. And this, to me, feels like one of the first shows to actually fill that void. It's interesting because, like I said, it feels like a CBS show, but it's one of there's a reason why that stuff's successful. Well, it is, and I think this tapped into it successfully.
Yeah, I think it is interesting that, like, family. So, like, this is, this is a show that like on broadcast would be after 8 p.m., after 9 p.m., right? It's not going to be a show that you get at, 6 or 7. And it's not family programming, right? But it is in the category of thing that, your dad, your grandpa, your mom, like that, like the adults in the family could all watch together and probably not be upset about, for the most part. Like nobody would have like their like sort of prudish sensibilities offended too badly. Like nobody would have to turn away because the violence was so grotesque. I mean, there are, like you said, there are like a couple moments in the series where that's the case, but like for the most part, it's really not. And so like, yeah, you have an opportunity there that's kind of like a PG-13 series that would be sort of approachable for a pretty wide audience, I would say, but it's still not a kid's show. It's not a cartoon. It's not like, it's like you said, I think it's catnip for boomers, sort of makes a good way of describing that in a lot of ways, but I don't know. Yeah, Jen, what were because you said you kind of hated the show.
I am 100% not the target demographic for this show. I did not enjoy it at all. I thought it was dull. And even though, like, I'm not going to be mad about looking at Alan Ritchson for that long. Like, this show, this season could easily have been an entire episode shorter, and it would have been fine. And I prefer my content to be a little weirder than all of this. These are based on books that my dad reads. I'm being literal there. Sorry, Dad, to out you, but like, it's just not for me. I'm glad that it exists. I think Paul and you make some very excellent points about this show. It's just not what I want to spend my time watching.
Yeah, I don't, again, I didn't love it, and it's not, I mean, and I think like Paul, I think Paul and I are probably like pretty close on this one, which is like, I didn't hate it. Like I didn't feel, I'm not upset about it. And I do think that once you sort of put your expectations in the right place, I think it's a perfectly fine show for the most part. And I enjoyed like aspects of it. Again, I enjoyed Alan Ritchson. I thought he was fun. I think the show could stand to be, I think there's a lot of things about the show that I would hope in season 2 get a little bit better. One, I think it could be a little bit more, I'm going to say funny, but what I mean is like, it could be a little bit more sardonic, a little bit more wry in general. I think it could have, it could play with the fact that like, he is a stoic kind of like really can be a very brutal character that really is a little bit autistic also. Like he does not really express himself or emotions or really seem to have emotions or seem to really get context that people, the context with which he's communicating with people seems a little bit confusing to him. And I think it would be helpful if they played that up a little bit. I also think that like doing something just to make it not sitcom, daytime TV, whatever kind of lighting and cinematography, I think would go a long way. Like making that a little bit more, again, I'll use a word that may or may not be the right word, but like a little bit more gritty in that area, I think could do a lot for the show without then going whole hog on the like bloody violence and nudity and all that kind of stuff. Like, I think if you did that, you could just tweak it in a way that I think would make it a little bit more interesting.
Yeah.
I could get on board with that.
I hesitate to say yes to that because with Hollywood, they can't seem to do in the middle. I feel like if they like, we need to make it more gritty, but here comes brutal decapitations and things coming out everywhere.
I just mean give me a hard shadow every so often, like
right,
yeah.
Like,
so if you gave me the choice between like what Hollywood say with gritty and this, I would take this 100% all day, every day. The other thing I wanted to agree with you with is that some of my favorite moments in the show were when they were being a little bit funny, or maybe it wasn't supposed to be funny, but it came off as fun. One of my favorite scenes was when Malcolm, the lead detective, was in a nondescript shady hotel, which there are a lot in the show. But he calls Reacher, and he's about to get offed by the cartel.
Yeah.
And Reacher's basically talks him through, and he just had said, when do you think this was built? And he just talks him through this whole thing, and Reacher just calm as can be. Just, have you seen the Kool-Aid Man commercial? I laughed out loud. It was perfect. And that if they lean into more of that kind of stuff, then that's going to make it even better. But I love that scene. It was perfect. It ticked all the boxes that I needed for this kind of show.
I think
I felt like they did more of that as the season went on as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's the trick of this show for me is like when I say I want it to be a little bit funnier, I don't mean in the sense of like slapstick or doing anything that like is jokes. Like I don't want characters to start quipping, right? Like I don't want it to turn into a Joss Whedon series. But those kinds of moments actually work really well. And I think the fact that Reacher himself is such a bad communicator in a lot of ways, like I think you can play on that in a way that works really well. And a lot of the parts that I liked about the series, those were the moments for me. Like there were moments where he was either being ultra literal or he was being coy, like sort of relying on a literal interpretation of something in order to get what he wanted rather than paying attention to somebody's actual meaning, and those kinds of things I think were pretty good and well handled. And I think again that a lot of that came down to Richmond's performance too, which again, I have generally positive things to say about. I think like he was he kind of fit that like sort of stoic, kind of mode really, really well. Now, that said, there are things about the series that I like fundamentally didn't like. Like honestly, the town, like I said earlier, the town felt like a town that somebody invented when they watched Deliverance or they heard about it, like the South. But it was like, for one thing, it was 100% white people. 99.999%. The barber was the lone exception. Barber and oddly enough, Malcolm Finney, the police detective, but he wasn't even from the town. He was from like Massachusetts or whatever, which doesn't make
if you've ever been to Massachusetts, I feel
like you would want to reverse those a little bit. But Finley, I liked him as a character. He's very uptight, sort of, not by the book exactly, but he's just very proper. I also like that he's so opposed to bad language. That was another one of those moments where Reacher was like, just say the word, man. Like, stop trying to find ways around using bad language. You end up just doing, saying silly things instead, which he did a lot. But I don't know. I mean, stuff like that, I feel like that for me, it took me out of the series, at least at the beginning for a little while, because I really felt the hand of like, we have a town full of like evil white people that like in a part of the country that is like, you're barely going to find a town that's less than 50%, like it's pretty wild. I mean, there are a couple here and there, but like
for the most part, the rural South is not at all that white. And this is one of the things that I'm talking about where they stuck too closely to the book, because Margrave, Georgia in The Killing Floor was almost exclusively white.
Huh.
Like it was written that way.
Okay.
And I was like, all right, this does not, you're breaking my suspension of disbelief here, because that's not how the rural South works.
Well, let me
especially not south of Atlanta.
Let me note that Lee Child, I just looked this up, is British. So.
Well, we solved that mystery.
So, I think quite possibly, Lee Child does not have that much experience in Middle Georgia. which
Stairs and Southerner.
this appears to be the case. No, I thought that part was weird. And then I also thought, like, I had a thought that was sort of along the lines of like, kind of like, the interesting thing about like the diversity, equity, inclusion stuff that we see in the film industry is sort of odd to me, because here's a situation where you actually have a really good opportunity to create a show with a large amount of that kind of diversity, right? Like you have a chance. It's set in, south of Atlanta, 100 miles, couple hundred miles, whatever it is, right? Like you would think now you have an opportunity to have a really mixed cast and to have like characters from, multiple ethnicities. And you've got an opportunity there to do something organically correct. And instead you see them they'll race swap stories like Lord of the Rings or whatever, where we're just talking about like Amazon Prime, has black elves and things like that in Lord of the Rings, which is like fairly explicitly against what Tolkien wrote, and also what makes sense for a story that is designed to be, essentially like ancient Europe, right? But then you've got a story like Reacher where you have like a really organic opportunity to do those same kinds of things, but without like being ham-fisted about it. And they don't take that opportunity at all. It seems very strange to me. Like that.
It is deeply weird.
I don't quite get it. I don't know. It also, It took me out of the story for a bit, because I kept looking at this town going like, there's something conspicuously missing here. If you're in a town in the South and it's non-white people. Like it's explicitly like there's no black people in this town like at all. And that seems very strange for this part of the country. And then I started looking, I made this point on Facebook, and I had a friend was like, well, hey, I spent, like a year or whatever in Douglas, Georgia, which is a small town. It's fairly comparable to Margrave. And it was like, and I didn't really see that. And I was like, and then I went and looked up demographics, and it was like 65% black in that town, in the town that he was talking about, where he was like,
if he just didn't see that many black people, he wasn't going out very often.
I think he was not not in the part of town. I think he was only in one part of town, let's just say.
And obviously they stuck to the book, but that could have been an interesting topic about power balances and things like that.
Yeah.
If you had the same bad guys, but most of the town wasn't white.
Yeah.
But when you stick to the book, I understand. I'm not
going to fault him,
I get it in the book,
but then honestly, then my criticism goes to Lee Child. It doesn't go to the showrunners in that case. It really goes to like the British author writing a Southern crime novel.
Yeah.
But that's not the showrunner's fault. So kudos to the showrunners, I guess, for trying to be faithful or whatever.
Yeah.
But
I do find it interesting with Amazon. We talked about Wheel of Time. We've talked about Lord of the Rings. Most of the other shows are pretty heavy on 2022 politics. This show felt the complete opposite of that.
In a lot of ways,
This is one of the most conservative shows that I can remember that I've watched in a long time. First, it's pretty explicitly pro borders, pro strong borders. The only reason why the underlord crime gang even starts having to kill people is because of a Coast Guard blockade. So we were enforcing our borders, and it unearthed crime. Like it's just. This is on Amazon, the same platform as these other shows that are just absolutely ridiculous. And I'm just very fascinated by it. In how does this happen? How does a show like this, which is also very pro gun, very pro individual rights, it just seems very odd.
Yeah, I mean, it's also like pro cop to some extent. Like it's not, I mean, all the police officers, not all of them, but I guess, but like most of the core series has, police officers who are, shown in a positive light. Obviously there are some corrupt cops, because there's sort of corruption throughout the whole thing. But I don't know. It's interesting because like, You've got
it's certainly pro-federal monetary policy.
Oh, well, yeah, let's talk about that. That's actually one of the more interesting things. Jen and I are working on an out of frame like video essay script currently. I think that'll be not the next one that goes out. Well,
no.
Yeah, actually maybe the next feature episode out after this actually airs.
Okay, yeah.
But
time is weird, y'all.
We're talking about like the core. We haven't really talked about the core. The mystery itself is actually surrounding a counterfeiting scam, basically. And so there's some guy who figured out the secret, basically, to printing a whole bunch of dollars, and that is, of course, a crime if you are a private citizen. But it is apparently not. It's like a Tuesday if you are the federal government and the Fed. So,
yep.
Also, it's by the way, just so we are clear, it is a complete mystery why inflation has happened, and nobody has any idea.
It's corporate greed.
It's probably corporate greed. Nobody could possibly know why inflation is 7.5. Oh, sorry, 8. Oh, sorry, 9. Oh, sorry, 10%. Whatever it is now. Like, Paul, you've been doing updates to a meme this whole year.
Oh my gosh,
it's like depressing. It
is depressing.
Where did we start? I think the meme started at like when you get a 3% raise and it's 5% inflation, and now we're like 7.5.
Yeah, and every time the comments are the same. Well, that's not even the real inflation number,
right?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
I get it. But yeah, I mean, like money printers going burr.
Yeah. Well, and the Fed just like yesterday or whenever, a couple days ago, well, maybe not yesterday, but whenever, was like surprised by this. They're like, we don't really understand. We said it was going to be transitory, and it seems to be continuing, and we don't really understand why. What? How do you have your job?
They didn't watch Common Sense Soapbox.
Yeah.
They needed to watch that first.
They did.
They really should have. My children have a better sense of why inflation happens than apparently professional economists, and that is very upsetting.
It is.
Makes professional economists look really good, huh?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I get pretty frustrated that like there are a lot of decent economists out there, and but it's too easy especially with, I mean, obviously like the profession is a lot of times very heavily tied into government and into politics, but also like it's very easy with like certain schools of economics. And, you know, we could be talking about the modern monetary theory people, but they're like, even within the economics profession, they're rightly viewed as basically insane. But like, you still have Keynesians, much more sort of standard schools, London School, you know, anything that's sort of Keynesian based, which is very common, you know, and and they still offer inflation as a solution to most, you know, economic problems. I mean, and this has been sort of the law of the land in the United States for, you know, 25 years or more. I mean, maybe 30 years at this point, which is like, anytime there's any kind of economic downturn, the federal government and the Fed's and the Federal Reserve's response has been, well, let's just print a ton of money and, you know, do some stimulus programs and send people checks and buy new roads and whatever else. Like, we're just going to throw a bunch of cash around, and throwing that cash around is going to allow, you know, the economy to sort of get back on track, because the whole thing for them is what Keynesians talk about as aggregate demand, right? Like, that's the whole basis of their understanding of what's good and bad in terms of an economy, you know. And when aggregate demand falls, that's a depression waiting to happen. So we have to boost that demand, and the only way they can do it is by throwing cash into the system. But there's a consequence to that. But it's such an obvious consequence. That it's what I don't get about it is like, it's such a blatantly obvious result.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the difference here this time, I mean, we've had inflation, but it's been a relatively, everyone can kind of stomach it. It hasn't really
sort
affected.
Of slow, you know?
Yeah, slow. But the problem this time is that then we shut down every mode of production.
Yeah.
So now we have fewer goods that are being chased with more dollars that have all of a sudden just poofed out of nowhere.
So let's be super clear about this, because inflation, when we talk about price increases as a result of inflation, is fundamentally about the gap between the stuff available and the amount of money that is available to chase the stuff. So like you can get higher prices by, either direction, right? Like you can suddenly have a reduction in supply. Let's say a hurricane knocks out the supplier of, this happened to us, a couple years ago, where there was a pipeline that broke and then gas prices went way up in Atlanta because the pipeline that serves us in Atlanta was no longer functioning. And so there was a lot less supply. And so there was the same dollars chasing the same amount of gas. There's the same dollars in the system, but there was a lot less gas. So gas prices went up, right? Or you can print a lot more dollars. You have the same amount of stuff. And then now there's more dollars for the same stuff. So you can pay more dollars for the stuff. Now, as Paul just said, we have the dual problem of less stuff and more dollars simultaneously, which is just, again, incredibly predictable, but like horrifying, because we normally haven't had both of those things simultaneously. Like normally we've had inflationary policies, but like still a pretty consistent production of goods and services, And
I think what hurts the most for this one is that this was all a choice.
Yeah. This was self-inflicted.
Like I went to the grocery store yesterday, y'all, and
you had to spell a spleen.
Like it was real bad. I've had over a year now to adjust to a difference in availability in the kind of food products that I like to buy in the grocery store. Just there's not as many people here in the Mountain West, and the diversity is not nearly so broad as it was outside of Atlanta. So the variety of goods available is just not as broad, and I've gotten used to that. However, even given that, what is actually available at my local grocery store, and this is not like a mom and pop thing. This is Smith's, which is basically Kroger. It is the largest grocery chain in the United States. Like I could not find heavy cream. Milk, the store brand milk is like $4 a gallon. It's really, really frustrating to go to the store and not even be able to find basic staples. And if you do find them, they're like twice as expensive as you remember them being, just like last month. And it was preventable. All of this was 100% preventable. My family is managing, but we're very, very fortunate to be managing. And not everybody is like upper middle class. So
yeah,
I get the frustration.
I found that to be one of the more like offensive things at the kind of mid pandemic, like 2020 and like early 2021, where we would see, and I would see, I mean, we would all see this, like you go to the grocery store and you would see, item limits on stuff, or you would see like barren shelves for certain kinds of things. And then you would see photos of that. And then you would see in the comments a whole bunch of people saying stuff like, well, there's still meat there, or there's still whatever it is there. It's just, it's like, it's not what you wanted, right? So you're still going to get something, But what that always assumed was that they were shopping at one of the stores that could command higher prices for stuff, and so they could actually get suppliers to bring them stuff. What they were not factoring in is the stores that serve more poorer areas, and not just in the United States. I think that's probably the more important thing, is like most of the places outside of the United States where there's just literally nothing there. Not like I went in for sirloin and ended up with, chuck or something like that, right? Like I went in for meat of any kind and it is not there. It is literally not there because Americans who have access to a Whole Foods got it, and did not, it did not end up in a place like Margrave, Georgia, for example, in the show, or even worse, in a place like Mexico City or something like that. Like you miss those pieces of all of this because it's so easy to be in that bubble of just like, well, look, it's inconveniencing that I had to wait a week to get flour, but like I could still get it eventually and it was fine. Well, there are a lot of people around the world for whom like that immediacy is that it matters, right? Like the fact that they couldn't get the food that day made a big difference. They didn't just have a freezer full of stuff that they could rely on for a couple weeks until things got a little bit back to, back in order. But I don't know. I've often been sort of offended by the way that people talk about that stuff dismissively, like it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah. The other part of this that has always struck me as very weird and is the very, very beginning of this: stay home, stay safe, while everyone else continues to help me live the lifestyle that I want to. Oh. And this has kind of come back up with the stuff going on in Canada.
Protest?
Dude. It just is mind, like how do people think that all this stuff just shows up? And maybe this is just me being around agriculture a lot growing up with just where I was born and raised, but it's really is crazy to me to think that all of the people that are making decisions in this country, and frankly most countries, just aren't affected by most economic decisions that they are making.
Yeah.
And it's really frustrating. And I think this is, and we've been complimented on this by some outside people, at least for FEE, is that we're one of the few organizations that have actually stuck to our principles during this last 2 years. And I could probably chalk that up to that we're not in Washington, D.C.
I would
too.
As
simple as that.
Sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Because it's striking to me when I talk to friends that I have in DC, because I lived there for almost a decade, and their outlook on all of this is totally different than mine. And I know that they don't really believe differently than I do, but it's the environment that you have to live in up in DC or New York City or Los Angeles or these big cities has just been so oppressive and fear mongering that it's crazy. Because I remember back April 2020, when Georgia ended the lockdown, we were all going to die.
It was an experiment
by May
in
2020.
mass. What was it? I'm trying to remember. The Atlantic had a headline that was very specific. It was like an experiment in mass murder or something. Like it was really aggressive
it was
headline.
Extremely extra.
We were fine. Like it did not result in massive spikes that were uncontrollable. It didn't result in hospitals being overwhelmed. Like it didn't, like if you look today back on any of that stuff, you will see that what happened here was what happened basically everywhere else on a fairly consistent sort of wave cycle, right? Like we opened up, there were waves, there were peaks and valleys, the whole thing like everything else. And then those same things happen in California, and those same things happen in New York, and those same things happen in DC. And it wasn't like this radical, oh no, like we did a different thing and then suddenly the world ended. Like we did a different thing and then like it was fine, pretty much, and Yeah, I found that all to be really interesting too, because especially moving outside of the city, because Atlanta itself still has a lot of people who are very concerned about stuff and who are very sort of in that mode, but I live outside of Atlanta now, and I don't see as many people being super neurotic about a lot of that stuff. And yet similarly, where I live is there's no problem. Like, there's just no problem. The problems are, as Paul mentioned before, they're self-inflicted. The problems that we have are problems of like supply of various goods and services. The problems are lumber is $12 a board, of 2x4 right now. Like that's something I'm acutely feeling right now, because I just bought a bunch of them this weekend, and like, that is unpleasant in a world where, like, a couple years ago it would have been $3, and it's just like, it's pretty wild when you're like, okay, I want to build a house. And then also, look, we talk about like home prices are way up, and prices for rent are way up, prices for used cars. I mean, we started this conversation talking about Paul trying to get a minivan. Like, you can barely get cars. You can barely get used cars. The used car market. A friend told me the other day that, like, used cars, for the first time I've ever heard of, are selling several $1,000s above MSRP for new cars right now.
And also office and warehouse space, which I am currently acutely aware of.
You're looking for more?
Well, my husband and I are inching ever closer to opening our own business. We may have found a location, but it's just, even finding the available space is crazy making. And when you have the core components to just like making stuff, like steel or lumber, so much more difficult to get a hold of, and therefore so much more expensive. And let's not talk about, like, this is not even counting the double-digit tariffs on a lot of these things. Well, of course people are having trouble finding these things. Of course people are having trouble affording these things. What on earth did you think was going to happen? But the problem is they didn't really think about what was going to happen. So
we weren't even allowed to debate it. I mean, it was like completely cut off from any kind of and
anybody who brought it up was a conspiracy theorist. Get out of here, crazy person.
Or flat out blocked on social media. I mean, it's
my gosh,
it's pretty wild. All right, let's wrap up we kind of got off the rails on the Reacher. Well, we did. I say we did and we didn't. I mean, like, the series really was. I mean, it's funny because it was like, the plot of it was really largely around. I mean, let's be honest. We watched the series because we wanted to watch, mystery unfold and police action and whatever action. But but the plot of it really was about, I mean, counterfeiting, and like, that just feels like our entire life right now is just like an endless series of the state counterfeiting its way out of a problem that it's not going to win. Like, it's not going to solve the problem. It hasn't solved the problem. So anyway, let's wrap it up here. Let's do star ratings for Reacher. I'm going to start with Jen because I feel like I know what your answer is going to be.
I'm going to give my star rating based entirely on potential for future seasons, because I think that there are some very interesting ways that this show could go, and it gets 1/4 of a star.
All right, Paul.
Surprising to me, this is a full star, and if I could give more stars, I would. And the reasoning for me is not necessarily because of the show, but it's because of all the other crap that's out there. I'm sorry, but this really, our whole cultural landscape of and you touched on this in your Arcane short, Sean.
Yeah.
But of anti-heroes and everyone has there's gray areas for motivations. No, you know what? Sometimes I just want this guy's a good dude. His whole life,
He's a good
just
dude.
a good dude, and he continues to be a good dude, and he saves the day. I'm sorry. Is that so bad to like nowadays? I mean, just more of that, please. And also the opportunities for spinoffs as the season goes on. I'm here for it. If they did a Malcolm Goodwin, who's the detective, they did a show with him
Finley,
who's solving
right?
some
Finley?
like Sherlock Holmes stuff in Boston. I'm here for it. And if they did one with Roscoe, you have to sell me on it.
Yeah, she's fine.
Yeah.
But like, I could get on board with a Finley show. Although I do feel like he's I feel like he works better as a I don't want to call him a sidekick.
He would need
exactly,
a sidekick,
but he's a straight man, sort of. Anyway, yeah, all right, I'm with you there. I'm going to give it 0.75. I'm going to give it 3/4. I like the show. I don't have any complaints. Paul actually probably brought me up on it a little bit, although I probably would have given it 3/4 either way. But I think I'm even more in favor just because I think setting expectations is good. But yeah, I think I'll stick with that. But all right, we're going to end it here. For everybody who is a subscriber to Out of Frame on Patreon or Subscribestar. And again, if you're not, it's patreon.com/outoframeshow or subscribestar.com/outoframeshow. Stick around. We'll do some Q&A right after the break here, and we'll keep that going. For everybody else, thank you so much for tuning in, for listening, and for watching Out of Frame and subscribing to the show on YouTube. So check us out on all of the social media, and we'll see you next time.